She trusted him, but she never imagined her own mother could betray her. What happened next shattered everything she believed about love, family, and truth. This is the story of heartbreak, secrets, and a betrayal that will change her life forever. It all began in a small neighborhood in Lagos where houses sat so close you could hear your neighbors' laughter through the walls. Amora was 22, bright-eyed, and full of hope. She had just finished university and was helping her mother, Mama Chinyere, run a small provision store at the corner of their street. Life wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful until everything changed. Amora had a boyfriend named Daniel. He wasn't rich, but he was kind. He was one of those people who could make you forget your worries with a single smile. They had met at church during youth fellowship, and since then, they had become inseparable. Every Sunday after service, they would walk home together, sharing meat pies and laughter, dreaming about a future where they would both have stable jobs and maybe a small apartment of their own. Mama Chinyere used to adore Daniel. She would always say, "That boy has good home training. He greets elders well, and he helps out without being asked." Whenever Daniel stopped by the shop, she would offer him chilled malt and even pack extra bread for him to take home. Amora thought it was sweet, at first. But slowly, things began to feel different. It started with how her mother began dressing up unusually well whenever Daniel was expected. Amora noticed the way Mama Chinyere would spend extra time applying powder, tying her wrapper neatly, and wearing her best blouse. At first, Amora brushed it off. Maybe she just wants to look good, she thought. But when she caught her mother smiling too brightly whenever Daniel complimented her food, a strange feeling settled in her chest. One evening, Daniel came by to help Amora restock the shop. Mama Chinyere was there, as usual, but instead of letting them work, she started teasing Daniel, laughing a little too loud at everything he said. "Daniel, you've been working out, eh? See how fine you're getting. If I was younger, I'd have fought my daughter for you," she said, chuckling as if it were a harmless joke. Amora forced a smile, but her stomach tightened. Daniel laughed awkwardly, brushing it off, but he avoided eye contact with Amora afterward. As days passed, her mother's words became bolder. Sometimes she would say things like, "You know, a good man should marry a woman who understands life, not these small girls who still want to party." Amora couldn't believe what she was hearing. She wanted to confront her mother, but how do you tell your own mother to stop flirting with your boyfriend? One Saturday afternoon, Amora was running errands when she realized she had forgotten her phone at home. She rushed back, hoping to grab it quickly, but as she entered, she froze. Daniel was in the sitting room, and Mama Chinyere was sitting right beside him, too close. They were talking softly, laughing in a way that felt too familiar. Amora stood at the doorway, heart pounding. Daniel noticed her first, and his smile faded instantly. Her mother turned, pretending nothing was wrong. "Ah, Amora, you're back early," she said, adjusting her wrapper. Amora didn't say a word. She just stared at them. Daniel stood up, stammering, "We were just talking about something." "About what?" she asked, her voice trembling. "About life," her mother said, avoiding her eyes. "He was telling me about his plans for the future." Amora wanted to believe that, but the look in her mother's eyes told a different story. That night, she couldn't sleep. She replayed everything in her mind, the laughter, the whispers, the closeness. Her heart hurt in ways she couldn't describe. Daniel sent her a message saying, "Please don't misunderstand. Your mum was only asking questions." But it didn't sit right with her. What kind of questions made a man lean in and smile like that? Over the next few weeks, her mother started acting possessive of Daniel. She would tell Amora, "You don't know how to treat a man. That boy is too nice for you. If you don't take care, another woman will collect him." Sometimes, when Daniel came around, Mama Chinyere would insist Amora stay at the shop while she entertained him at home. The tension became unbearable. Amora began to avoid bringing Daniel home. But her mother noticed. "Why don't you bring your boyfriend again?" she asked one evening. "Has he stopped visiting, Or you're hiding something. Amora snapped. Maybe you should ask yourself that, Mama. You're the one who seems to like him more than I do. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Mama Chinier's face hardened instantly. What are you saying, Amora? Are you accusing me of something? Amora's eyes burned. You know exactly what I'm saying. For a moment, the room was silent. Then her mother stood up and said, You have grown wings, haven't you? I raised you, fed you, and now you're insulting me over a man. Amora couldn't answer. She just walked out, her chest heavy with anger and shame. From that day, everything changed. Her mother stopped speaking to her for days, acting cold and distant. Daniel, on the other hand, tried to fix things, but his messages became less frequent. Amora felt trapped between two people she loved, both slipping away from her. Then came the moment that shattered everything. One afternoon, a friend of Amora's sent her a message. I just saw your mum and Daniel together at the new restaurant near the junction. Are they okay? Amora froze, her phone shaking in her hand. Her throat went dry. She couldn't believe what she was reading. Without thinking, she grabbed her bag and ran out. By the time she reached the restaurant, she saw them, sitting at a table by the window, laughing, Daniel's hand resting too comfortably on her mother's arm. The sight hit her like a slap. She stood there, trembling, tears filling her eyes, unable to move. People around her were eating, talking, living their lives, while her world was quietly breaking apart. That was the day Amora realized she was not just fighting for love. She was fighting against betrayal from the person she trusted most in the world. And that was only the beginning. The air that evening felt heavy, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. Amora stood frozen across the street from the restaurant, staring through the glass windows at her mother and Daniel. She could see their laughter, soft, comfortable, almost intimate. Daniel leaned closer to her mother, his voice quiet but warm, the kind of warmth Amora had once thought belonged to her alone. For a moment, her mind refused to believe it. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they were just talking. But then her mother reached over and touched Daniel's hand in a way that seemed too familiar, too deliberate to be innocent. Amora felt her chest tighten, her breath hitching. Her vision blurred, not from the tears, but from shock. She wanted to walk away, to pretend she hadn't seen it, but her feet moved without her permission. Before she knew it, she was crossing the street, her heart pounding in her ears. She could hear voices behind her, people whispering, looking her way, but she didn't care. Every step toward that restaurant was a step into a storm she wasn't ready to face. She pushed the glass door open. The soft chime of the bell sounded, and they looked up. Daniel's smile faltered, and her mother's expression stiffened instantly. Amora, Daniel said, standing up too quickly. I. Her mother's eyes narrowed. What are you doing here? She asked, her voice sharp, too sharp. Amora didn't answer. She just walked straight to their table, her hands clenched so tightly her nails dug into her palms. Daniel opened his mouth again, but she cut him off. What is going on here? Her voice trembled, but it had a strength she didn't know she had. Why are you sitting here like lovers while I'm outside wondering if my own mother is trying to steal my boyfriend? The silence was deafening. People at nearby tables started to look over, sensing something intense. Her mother's lips pressed into a thin line. Daniel looked down at the table, avoiding her eyes. This isn't what it looks like, Daniel said finally, his voice low. Amora, please, let me explain. Explain? She laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in her own ears. How do you explain this? You, my boyfriend, sitting here holding my mother's hand? Laughing together like you've known each other for years. Tell me, Daniel, how does that look? Her mother broke in, her tone cold and sharp now. Amora, you don't understand. Sit down. No, Mama, Amora said, her voice rising. I understand enough. You've been acting differently around him for weeks. You've been looking at him in ways no mother should look at her daughter's boyfriend. And now I see it with my own eyes. Daniel finally looked up, his eyes full of regret and confusion. Amora, please, this isn't. Then what is it? She cut in, tears spilling freely now. Tell me what this is. I want to hear it from both of you. Her mother leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. You're making a mountain out of nothing. Daniel and I were talking about business. I was giving him advice. Amora's lips curled in disbelief. Business? Is that what you call touching his hand, leaning in close, and laughing like you're in a private world together? Daniel opened his mouth again, but her mother put her hand on his arm. Daniel, don't say another word. Amora felt her world spin. Her legs felt weak, but she stood her ground. I trusted both of you. I let you into my life. And this is how you repay me. With betrayal. Her mother looked away, her face unreadable. Daniel looked torn, unable to meet her gaze. Amora turned sharply and walked out. The cold air hit her face, but it was nothing compared to the chill in her heart. People outside stared, some whispering, some looking away uncomfortably. She didn't care. All she could think of was how her world had just shifted in ways she could never undo. That night, Amora sat in her small room, staring at her phone. Daniel's name flashed on the screen dozens of times, each message begging for forgiveness, for a chance to explain. But she couldn't bring herself to read them. Every message felt like salt in a wound. Her mother stayed silent all evening, pretending as if nothing had happened. The next morning, life in the shop felt heavy. The air between Amora and her mother was thick with unspoken words. Mama Chinyere pretended to be busy, avoiding eye contact, but Amora could see her watching her out of the corner of her eye. Daniel didn't come to the shop. He stopped replying to her calls. The emptiness of it all gnawed at her. Later that week, Amora was helping a customer when she heard her mother on the phone in hushed tones. She couldn't hear the whole conversation, but she caught enough: Daniel's name, words like meet, later, and don't tell her. Her blood ran cold. She wanted to confront her mother then and there, but something told her to wait. She needed proof, something undeniable. She needed to know for sure before she broke everything apart. That evening, Amora decided to follow her mother. She watched quietly from behind the corner of a busy street as her mother left the shop carrying her purse, heading toward Daniel's neighborhood. Her heart pounded in her chest. She followed her quietly, weaving through narrow streets until they reached a small cafe tucked away from the road. From her hiding spot, Amora could see Daniel already there, sitting at a table with her mother. Their heads were close together, and she could hear snippets of their conversation. Daniel laughing softly, Mama Chinyere leaning in, touching his arm again. Amora's chest tightened so much she could barely breathe. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was real. That night, Amora lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts swirling. She felt anger, heartbreak, confusion, and something else: fear. Fear of what this betrayal could mean for her life. For her heart. For her family. She realized she had a choice to make. She could confront them both now and risk losing everything, or she could stay quiet and gather more truth before making her move. Her mind kept replaying one question: why would her own mother want to take her boyfriend? That question burned deep inside her, and Amora knew this was far from over. The morning after that night, the air in Amora's small room felt heavier than usual. The sound of rain tapping gently on the window made the silence even sharper. She lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene at the cafe over and over. Her mind felt like it was split into pieces, every thought pulling her in a different direction. She knew one thing for certain: her life could never be the same again. That image of her mother leaning close to Daniel, laughing quietly, touching him, it was burned into her memory. She wanted to cry, to scream, to run away. But instead, she sat still, letting the storm inside her grow. At the shop, things had changed without anyone saying a word. Mama Chinyere moved with a strange air of calm, like nothing had happened, while Amora worked in silence, her mind heavy. The customers came and went, unaware of the tension. But Amora noticed every little thing. How her mother watched Daniel's number pop up on her phone screen, how she smiled faintly when reading his messages, and how she suddenly seemed more interested in her own appearance than ever before. That day, Amora decided to dig deeper. She had to know the truth. She could no longer live in doubt. After closing the shop, she went to the cafe where she had seen her mother and Daniel the night before. She didn't go in. Instead, she found a spot where she could watch without being noticed. Hours passed. People came and went, the cafe filled with chatter and laughter, but her eyes never left the table where Daniel and her mother sat today. Then, she saw it, her mother reaching across the table, touching Daniel's hand again, whispering something that made him smile softly. Her stomach twisted. That night, Amora couldn't sleep again. Her mind was a battlefield. She thought of confronting Daniel directly. She thought of telling her mother exactly what she had seen. But something inside her warned her to wait. She wanted clarity, proof so strong there would be no room for denial. The next day, Amora made a quiet plan. She started following her mother more often, noting her movements. She pretended to be busy at the shop, but she always kept an eye on where Mama Chinyere was going. It became a routine. Every evening, she would slip away after closing, keeping her distance as she watched her mother meet Daniel at different places. Sometimes a cafe, other times near the park, or at Daniel's workplace. Amora began collecting evidence without anyone noticing. She took pictures discreetly, wrote down dates and times, and even recorded a few conversations when they were loud enough to be caught. Every piece she gathered tightened the knot in her chest. She wanted to run to Daniel and demand an explanation, but she was afraid of what she might hear. One evening, as Amora followed her mother to another meeting spot, something unexpected happened. Her mother noticed her. She stopped in her tracks, turning slowly to look in Amora's direction. Their eyes met for just a moment before Mama Chinyere quickly looked away, slipping into a shop across the street. Amora stayed hidden, her heart pounding. That night, she confronted Daniel, not in person, but through messages. She sent him one that simply read, "We need to talk." His reply was almost immediate. "Can we meet tomorrow?" They agreed to meet in a quiet park near her house. Amora spent the rest of the evening pacing her room. She thought about what she was going to say, about how she would demand the truth without losing control. When the next day came, Daniel arrived looking tense. His shirt was slightly untucked, his expression unreadable. Amora could tell he had been trying to prepare himself for something important. "Amora," he began softly, "I wanted to talk to you because I know you've been upset." "You've been seeing her, haven't you?" she cut in, her voice trembling but firm. Daniel flinched, but he didn't answer immediately. "It's complicated," he said after a long pause. Amora's eyes narrowed. "Complicated? You're telling me that seeing my mother, behind my back, is complicated?" He looked down at his hands, twisting them nervously. "It's not what you think. She's been helping me with a job opportunity. I didn't want you to worry." Amora shook her head. "Stop lying, Daniel. I've been following her. I've seen enough to know there's more going on. Why? Why would she do this? And why haven't you told me?" His silence was louder than any answer. For the first time, Amora felt a deep shift inside her. She realized Daniel's hesitation wasn't about hiding business talks, it was about hiding something personal, something neither of them wanted her to see. She could feel the weight of betrayal crushing her, but she also knew she needed more than just suspicion. That night, Amora confronted her mother quietly in their shop after closing hours. Mama Chinyere was cleaning, her face unreadable. "Mama, I know what you've been doing with Daniel," Amora said without preamble. Mama Chinyere paused, her hand stilling. She didn't look up. "Amora, I can explain." "Explain what?" "How you've been stealing my boyfriend." Amora's voice cracked. "It's not like that," her mother said softly, her voice tinged with guilt. "But I won't deny I've felt something for him." Amora's heart stopped. You have. Mama Chinyere looked up finally, her eyes wet. I've tried to fight it, Amora. But the more I see him, the more I feel. I know it's wrong. I know you love him. But this is real. Amora stepped back, her hands shaking. The world felt like it was collapsing around her. Her mother, the one person she thought she could trust, had betrayed her in the deepest way possible. That night, Amora sat alone in her room, tears flowing freely. She felt a mix of sadness, anger, confusion, and an ache she couldn't name. She knew she was standing at the edge of something dangerous, something that could destroy everything she had believed in. And deep inside, she knew she had to decide what she was going to do next. Because nothing would ever be the same again. The storm was getting stronger. Amora woke up that morning with her chest heavy and her mind restless. The air in her room felt thicker, as if the walls themselves carried the weight of her pain. She stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours, replaying her last conversation with her mother over and over. Mama Chinyere's words haunted her. I've tried to fight it, Amora, but this is real. They didn't sound like excuses, not to Amora. They sounded like a confession. At the shop, the day felt different. Amora moved slowly, her usual energy drained. She greeted customers in a soft, distracted voice, her mind elsewhere. Her mother worked nearby in silence, glancing at her from time to time, but saying nothing. The air between them was tight, as if one wrong move would shatter the fragile calm. Amora decided she needed answers that couldn't come from whispers, secret meetings, or stolen glances. She needed proof, but she also needed confrontation. She needed clarity. That afternoon, she called Daniel. Her hands trembled as she pressed the call button. Her heart raced when he picked up. Amora. His voice was low, careful, as if he had been expecting her call. We need to talk, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Tonight? He asked quietly. Yes, tonight. She hung up before he could say anything else. The hours that followed were unbearable. Every moment felt stretched, each minute echoing with the question, what would she hear tonight? The shop closed as usual, but tonight Amora stayed inside until her mother left. She needed to be alone before facing Daniel. When Daniel arrived that evening, she was waiting outside the shop. The night air was cool, but it did little to ease the tension that clung to her. He looked at her with a mix of guilt and determination. Amora, he said softly, I didn't want it to get to this. It's already here, she said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. They walked in silence to a small park nearby. The sound of distant traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves filled the quiet between them. Amora finally stopped and turned to him. Daniel, tell me the truth. Not what you want to say, not what you hope I believe. Tell me exactly what is happening between you and my mother. He sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. Amora, I care about you. I do. But your mother, she reached out to me when I was in a rough place. She offered help. At first, it was purely about business, but, he hesitated. It became something more. I didn't want it to, but I couldn't stop it. Amora stared at him, disbelief and hurt mingling in her eyes. So it's true. You've been seeing her. You've been hiding it from me this whole time. I didn't want to hurt you, he said, his voice breaking slightly. I thought I could handle it, but I can't. The words hit Amora harder than she expected. Her breath came in short, sharp bursts. She felt a strange mix of rage and sorrow. She wanted to scream, to slap him, to cry. But she just stood there, silent, letting his confession sink in. She remembered all the moments she had shared with Daniel, the laughter, the quiet talks at night, the dreams they had built together. And now, they were crumbling. I need time, she said finally, her voice low. Time to think. He nodded slowly, as if expecting her answer. I understand. Amora walked away without looking back. Her steps felt heavy, each one dragging her further into an unknown place she wasn't ready to face. That night, She lay in bed staring at her phone. She didn't call her mother. She didn't call Daniel. She just stared at the ceiling, her mind replaying the tangled threads of betrayal, love, and confusion. The next morning, she woke with a strange determination. She wasn't going to let this situation control her. She would get to the bottom of it. She would find out what her mother and Daniel had been hiding. That afternoon, Amora found herself outside Daniel's workplace. She didn't want him to see her, so she kept a safe distance, watching quietly as he spoke to someone inside. From her vantage point, she could see her mother walking up to him, her expression unreadable. They spoke quietly at first, but then their voices grew louder. Amora couldn't hear the words, but she could see their gestures, the way they leaned toward each other, the way her mother touched his arm briefly. It was enough to fuel the storm inside her. Instead of confronting them, Amora decided to follow them again. They left together, walking down narrow streets that eventually led them to an apartment building. Her heart pounded in her chest as she watched them disappear inside. That night, Amora couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with possibilities. She thought of confronting them head-on, but she feared what the truth might bring. She thought of walking away, cutting both of them out of her life completely. But a part of her wanted to stay, to watch, to see how deep this went. The next morning, she made a choice. She would not confront them yet. She would gather every piece of truth she could find. She would watch quietly, patiently, until there was no way to deny what had happened. Amora began keeping a detailed record, notes, photos, times, places. Every meeting between her mother and Daniel became another piece of the puzzle. Every whispered conversation, every lingering touch, every secret glance was carefully recorded. Her world became a web of observation. She became quiet at the shop, careful not to reveal her growing suspicion. But every moment away from them was spent watching, waiting, and wondering. One evening, as she followed them from a distance, she saw something that shook her to her core. They entered a small, secluded house on the outskirts of town. From where she stood, she could see shadows moving behind drawn curtains. For hours, they stayed inside. When they emerged, Daniel looked tense. Her mother's expression was unreadable, but Amora could tell something had changed. They didn't speak as they left. There was no laughter this time, no comfort between them, only silence. Amora stepped back into the shadows and let the cool night air wash over her. She knew now that whatever was happening between her mother and Daniel was no longer just a secret. It was something much deeper, something dangerous. That night, she sat in her room with her journal open. She wrote down everything she had seen, every detail she could remember. Her hands trembled as she wrote, but there was a strange clarity in her heart. Amora knew that her next move would decide everything. She could no longer stand by and watch. She had to act. But what she didn't know was that her mother and Daniel were already one step ahead of her. And the next move they were planning would change her life forever. The next morning, Amora woke with a knot of unease in her chest. Sleep had been elusive, her dreams had been restless, filled with flashes of Daniel and her mother, their secret meetings, their silent touches, and the look in her mother's eyes that she could never forget. It felt as though the truth was no longer hidden, it was breathing beside her, waiting for her to reach for it. She moved through the day with a quiet determination. At the shop, she worked with precision, avoiding eye contact with her mother. Mama Chinier seemed aware of the change in her daughter, but she stayed silent, as if testing Amora's patience. The air between them was electric, heavy with unspoken words. Customers sensed it too, the way Amora moved slower, her smiles forced, her laughter absent. That evening, Amora decided she needed to speak to someone who could help her make sense of what was happening. She thought of her best friend, Ifema, someone who had always been honest with her, even when the truth hurt. She called her and they agreed to meet at a small cafe nearby, far enough from prying eyes. When she arrived, Ifema was already there, sipping tea with a thoughtful expression. Amora slid into the seat opposite her, her hands curling tightly around her cup. She didn't even bother with small talk. "Ifema, I don't know what to do," she said quietly. My mother, she's been seeing Daniel. Efima's eyes widened. Seeing him? Like, more than friends? Amora nodded, her throat tight. I've been watching them. They meet in secret. I've got proof, but I don't know what to do with it. My mother, she told me it's real. She said she can't fight her feelings. I don't know if Daniel feels the same way, but he hasn't denied it. Efima reached across the table and grabbed her hand. Amora, this is messy. But you can't let it destroy you. You need to be smart. Don't rush to confront them without knowing the full truth. I know, Amora said, her voice trembling. That's why I've been watching. But every day I find more pieces, and my heart can't take it anymore. I need to know why. Why would my mother do this? Why would Daniel? Efima looked at her with concern. You're going to find your answer, but you need to be ready for it. Sometimes the truth isn't what we want. That night, Amora stayed awake longer than usual. She went over every moment she had recorded, every photograph, every note, every detail of their meetings. Her room was filled with scraps of paper, her phone loaded with pictures, and her mind heavy with questions. The next day, Amora decided to follow them again. But this time, she chose a different approach. She wouldn't just watch. She would get closer. She needed to hear their conversation for herself. She followed them discreetly, keeping to the shadows as they moved through the streets. They went further than usual, to a small neighborhood she had never been to before. The houses were close together, their walls painted in soft pastel colors, and the air was filled with the sound of children playing. They stopped at a quiet house with a faded gate. Daniel knocked softly, and her mother opened the door, letting him in without a word. Amora stayed hidden, crouching low behind a hedge, straining to hear. Inside, voices came muffled through the walls. She caught snippets, Daniel's voice low, almost pleading. Her mother's voice was calmer, but there was an edge to it she didn't recognize. You know this can't go on, she said. I know, Daniel replied. But I can't stop. Amora. I can't stop thinking about her. Amora's heart pounded. Her mother. His words hung in the air like a blade. I'm hurting my own daughter, her mother said softly. Amora trusts you. She trusts me. And yet, here we are. There was a pause. Then Daniel's voice, thick with emotion. I can't help how I feel. I never planned for this to happen. But it did. And now. Amora's breath caught. She could hear her mother's quiet sob. I don't know what to do anymore, she whispered. That was enough for Amora. She slipped away quietly, her mind racing. Her hands shook as she walked home. Her heart was heavy, not just with betrayal, but with the knowledge that her mother and Daniel were caught in something dangerous and impossible to untangle. That night, Amora stayed awake staring at the ceiling. The words she had heard replayed in her mind over and over. Daniel admitted he couldn't stop thinking about her mother. Her mother admitted she didn't know what to do. Neither of them seemed to care about her pain. By morning, Amora knew she had to act. But she also knew that rushing in could destroy everything. She needed a plan. She began writing again, filling a notebook with observations, questions, and strategies. She mapped out every meeting she had recorded, noting times, places, and patterns. She even started sketching diagrams of their movements, trying to connect the dots. Her life became consumed with the secret she was keeping. She barely spoke to her mother now, avoiding her gaze at the shop. Daniel sensed the change too. He tried to talk to her, but she avoided him. One evening, as she closed the shop, she found her mother waiting for her outside. Her mother's eyes were heavy, her face tired. Amora, she said softly. Don't, Amora replied, her voice firm. Not now. Her mother's shoulders sagged, and she said nothing more. Amora walked past her without looking back. That night, Amora lay in bed, restless. She knew her next step was crucial. She had to decide whether to confront them both together or find another way to expose the truth. But deep down, She knew whatever choice she made would change everything. And that change was coming faster than she expected. Because she wasn't the only one watching anymore. That morning, Amora woke with a strange mix of exhaustion and sharp clarity. Her dreams had been restless again, tangled with shadows of the past days. The stolen glances between her mother and Daniel, the hushed voices at the secluded house, and Daniel's confession to her that still burned in her memory. She sat up in bed, the faint morning light slipping in through her window. Her body ached from lack of sleep, but her mind was wide awake, buzzing with questions and a growing sense of urgency. At the shop, the air felt heavier than usual. Mama Chinier moved with her usual efficiency, but her smile was forced, and every now and then, she would glance toward Amora with an expression that was unreadable. Amora met her gaze once, just long enough for her mother to look away. There was no room for small talk today. Every movement felt calculated, each glance, each breath. Amora decided to leave the shop early. She needed to think and, more than that, she needed to act. She grabbed her notebook, filled with her meticulous records, and slipped it into her bag. Her plan was becoming clearer. She had to find a way to catch them in a moment where they couldn't deny what was happening. By midday, she found herself at a small cafe across town. It wasn't far from where Daniel often worked, and she knew it was the kind of place where he might stop for a quick break. She took a seat by the window, pulling her notebook out and reviewing her observations. Every meeting she had documented between her mother and Daniel pointed to something deliberate. The times, the places, the secrecy, it was no accident. An hour later, she saw Daniel walk past the cafe. He was alone, but he glanced around nervously before stepping inside another building down the street. Amora's heart quickened. She decided to follow him again, but with more caution than before. This time, she kept her distance, staying in the shadows and letting him lead her where he wanted. She followed him through a maze of narrow streets until he stopped in front of a small, weathered building. He checked his phone and then knocked lightly at the door. A moment later, her mother appeared. Amora froze in the shadows. They stepped inside together without speaking, and the door closed quietly behind them. She stayed hidden, but her mind was alive with what she had just witnessed. Her breathing slowed, but her heart pounded in her ears. She knew she had to get closer. She circled the building, finding a small window on the side. It was slightly cracked, and she could just barely see inside. The dim light revealed her mother and Daniel sitting close together, their heads bent toward each other. Daniel's hand rested lightly on her mother's arm. She leaned in closer, straining to hear. "It's getting harder." Daniel's voice was low, almost trembling. "I want to stop, but I can't. Amora, she means everything to me, but so do you." Her mother's voice was softer, almost pleading. "Daniel, we can't keep going like this. She'll find out eventually. And when she does..." "Let her find out," Daniel interrupted. "Let her see. I don't care anymore. I just want to be with you." Amora's chest tightened. The words they spoke were heavy, dangerous. They weren't just talking about a momentary lapse. They were confessing to something deliberate and impossible to undo. She backed away quietly, her mind racing. Her body was tense with adrenaline. She had what she needed: proof, words, and a clearer picture of what was happening. But now the question wasn't just about knowing. It was about what to do with the truth. That night, Amora sat alone in her room. Her notebook lay open on her bed, filled with photographs, scribbled notes, and the details of their meetings. Her mind was restless, and her fingers traced the edges of the pages like a nervous habit. She thought about confronting them. But every time the thought crossed her mind, her heart sank with fear. Confrontation could lead to chaos. But silence meant letting it continue. She couldn't decide which was worse. By dawn, she made a decision. She would gather more evidence, but she would also prepare for confrontation. She needed to be sure, not just for herself but for the moment when she could no longer stand by. The next days became a blur of observation. She followed them at different times, sometimes on foot, sometimes from a distance in a parked car. She kept detailed records, noting every time they met, every time they spoke in hushed tones, every subtle touch. Then came the day that changed everything. Amora was following them when she noticed something different. They didn't just enter a building or meet in a cafe. They walked into a place she didn't recognize, an old villa on the edge of town. It was large, with vines crawling up the walls and heavy wooden doors. A soft light spilled from the windows, and she could hear faint voices carrying into the night. Something about the place unsettled her. This wasn't just a meeting spot. It felt like a hiding place. She stayed hidden, watching through the dark until the door opened again. Her mother and Daniel emerged, but they weren't alone. A man stepped out with them, someone Amora had never seen before. His presence brought a cold fear into her chest. He was tall, with a sharp expression, and he looked at them with something unreadable. They spoke briefly before parting ways. Her mother and Daniel moved together in a way that made Amora's heart ache. Their closeness wasn't just physical, it was something deeper, something that seemed to bind them beyond words. That night, Amora could not sleep. The image of that man stayed with her. Who was he? And why had he been there? Her mind raced with theories. Was he a friend, a business partner, or something else entirely? By morning, Amora knew that this mystery man was a key piece of the puzzle. Her plans shifted. It was no longer just about her mother and Daniel. Now she had to understand the role this man played in their secret. Her days became even more consumed. She didn't rest. She shadowed them with more precision, documenting every step they took. She even started following the man, hoping he would lead her to answers. Every moment of her life became part of this pursuit. Her shop work became mechanical, her conversations short and distracted. Even her mother began to notice her silence. One evening, as Amora followed them again, they entered the villa once more. She hid nearby, watching as they disappeared inside. Her notebook was clutched in her hand, her heart pounding. She had enough now to demand answers. But she also knew the truth she was chasing was no longer simple. It was tangled, dangerous, and capable of breaking everything she had ever believed about love, trust, and family. And deep down, Amora knew that when the confrontation came, nothing would ever be the same again. The next chapter of this story was about to begin. Night had fallen again, but sleep felt impossible for Amora. Her mind was tangled with the images she had seen over the last weeks, the quiet meetings, the stolen touches, Daniel's words, her mother's soft confessions, and now the strange man at the villa. Her room felt smaller, her breath heavier, as if every secret she'd uncovered was pressing down on her chest. The air outside was humid, and the distant sound of traffic mixed with faint laughter from the street below. But Amora heard none of it. Her eyes stayed fixed on her notebook, now bursting with evidence. Photos, scribbled notes, times, and locations, even little sketches of the villa and the people she had seen there. Every page seemed to throb with truth. She knew her next step had to be careful. She couldn't rush in without a plan. But she also knew time was running out. Something in her gut told her that the meeting at the villa was not a random choice, and that the man she had seen was not simply a bystander. He was part of something bigger. The following day, Amora spent her morning watching Daniel. She knew he worked at a small workshop not far from her shop, and she arrived early, positioning herself where she could watch without being noticed. Daniel arrived on time, but something about his movement seemed different. He wasn't just going about his work. He kept looking over his shoulder, checking his phone, and occasionally glancing toward a narrow alley nearby. Amora's curiosity burned hotter. She decided she had to follow him without being seen. After a few hours, Daniel slipped away from his workshop, heading down the alley and disappearing into a part of the city Amora had rarely been to before. She followed him through winding streets until he arrived at another building, smaller, older, and even more worn than the villa. The air smelled different here, heavier somehow, as if it carried secrets with it. Daniel knocked gently, and the door opened before he could finish. This time, Amora didn't wait to hide in the shadows. She moved closer, careful and quiet, until she could hear the voices inside. They were muffled, but the tone was different, urgent, tense. "She's getting too close," Daniel's voice said. "We need to be careful." The other voice, deep and firm, replied, "She will find out eventually. The more we hide, the more dangerous it becomes. You both need to be certain before it's too late." Amora froze. The voice wasn't her mother's. She recognized it instantly. It was the man from the villa. Her chest tightened. They were talking about her. She pressed herself closer to the wall, heart pounding. She could barely breathe. "I can't stop this," Daniel said again, his voice filled with strain. "I care about her, more than I thought possible." "You've made your choice," the man replied coldly. "But you must understand, the consequences will be heavy. If she finds out, it will destroy everything. And you will not be able to undo it." The conversation ended abruptly. The door opened and Daniel stepped out alone, glancing around as though expecting Amora to be there. Her breath hitched, but she stayed still. She knew Daniel was suspicious now. Amora decided it was time to shift her plan. Watching and recording was no longer enough. She needed to step into the storm. That evening, she went to see Ephema. She met her at a small tea shop, a place where no one would recognize them. Her voice was low as she spoke. "I have everything now. But there's something bigger. I overheard Daniel and another man talking. They mentioned me. And they sounded afraid." Ephema's eyes widened. "Amora, this is dangerous. You need to be careful." "I know," Amora said. "But I can't stop. I need to know why. And I think this man, he's the key. I'm going to find him." That night, she began her search. She went back to her notebook, cross-referencing every location and time. The villa, the small building, the times Daniel and her mother had met. Patterns began to emerge. There was a schedule to their meetings, late evenings, always when the city was quieter. Amora decided she would follow them again that night. She waited until the shop was closed and the streets had calmed. Then she slipped into her jacket and left quietly. She followed Daniel again, keeping her distance, moving through the streets like a shadow. This time, he led her somewhere unfamiliar, a narrow dockside where the air was damp and salty. The sound of water lapping against wood mixed with distant voices. At the end of the pier, a small boat was tied up. Daniel stepped onto it, glancing back toward the shore. Then her mother appeared, as if arriving from nowhere, and climbed onto the boat beside him. Amora's heart thudded harder than ever. This was no ordinary meeting. This was secrecy taken to another level. The boat moved quietly away from the dock, gliding into darkness. Amora stood frozen at the edge of the pier, her mind swirling. She knew she couldn't follow them here, not without risking everything. But the image of them together on that boat burned into her mind. When she returned home, her phone buzzed with a message she didn't recognize. She unlocked it. It was from an unknown number. The message read simply, "Stop following them. It's not safe. They know." Her breath caught in her throat. Someone was watching her. Now the game had changed. Amora's pursuit of the truth was no longer just about her mother and Daniel. It was about survival. And she knew that the moment she stepped forward, there would be no turning back. The next episode would uncover more than just betrayal. It would reveal dangerous secrets she wasn't ready to face. The air in Amora's room felt heavier that night, as though the walls themselves knew she was walking toward something that could break her. Her phone glowed softly beside her bed, the warning message still there, unknown sender, plain words, but enough to make her hands tremble. Someone was watching her. She stared at it for a long time, her thoughts tangled. For weeks, she had been chasing shadows, following Daniel, tracking her mother's movements, recording every secret meeting. But now, the walls around her had begun to close in. The truth was no longer hidden. It was dangerous. Amora spent the next day moving carefully. She went about her work at the shop with a quiet precision, her eyes always scanning. Customers noticed her distraction, but no one asked. She knew she had to keep her focus sharp, because every moment now mattered. By evening, she had made a decision. She would confront them both, but not blindly. She would go prepared. She arranged to meet Ifema again in a quiet cafe. Ifema looked at her with worry, her brow furrowed. Amora, this is bigger than you think. You don't know what they are involved in. You could get hurt. I know, Amora said, her voice steady despite the tension inside her. But I can't stop now. I need to hear it from them. Ifema nodded, her eyes searching hers. Then be careful. Whatever they are hiding, it's dangerous. That night, Amora dressed in dark clothes and took her phone, her notebook, and a small voice recorder. She slipped quietly into the streets, her senses heightened. Her destination was the villa, the place where she had seen her mother, Daniel, and the stranger together. She had pieced together enough to know this was where they were keeping something hidden. The villa loomed in the night, its walls shadowed, its windows dim. Amora crouched in the bushes nearby, heart pounding. She saw movement inside through a cracked window, figures talking, moving closer together, voices low. She slipped closer, her steps careful, and pressed herself against the wall. She could hear pieces of their conversation. We can't wait any longer, her mother's voice said softly but with tension. She's getting too close. If she finds out. She already knows more than we thought, Daniel said sharply. We can't risk it getting out. The man said. She said nothing. The stranger cut in, his tone cold, commanding. The girl must be controlled. If she interferes, everything will collapse. Amora's breath caught. Control. Interference. The words were heavier than she expected. They weren't just speaking about love and betrayal now, there was something bigger at stake. She stepped back, her mind racing. She knew she couldn't just confront them without knowing the whole truth. She needed answers. For the next week, Amora shadowed the villa, watching every movement, recording every sound she could catch. But then she noticed something strange. Daniel and her mother stopped meeting openly. Their movements became more secretive. Meetings were no longer in predictable places. Even the man at the villa seemed to vanish. Amora felt frustration gnaw at her, but also determination. She knew she was close. She began asking quietly around, small questions to people who might know something. Slowly, a pattern emerged. The villa was a meeting place for something illegal, something dangerous. Her mother and Daniel were involved, but so was the stranger, and possibly more people she didn't know. One night, she decided to take a risk. She climbed the fence of the villa, slipping inside under the cover of darkness. Her heart pounded as she moved carefully toward the main building. Inside, she saw them, her mother, Daniel, and the man, standing over a table with papers, photographs, and envelopes. They looked serious, tense. We have to end this, Daniel said quietly. She's getting too close, and soon it will be out. Her mother's voice trembled. But I can't. Not now. Not when it's all coming together. The man's voice was sharp. Then you will all face the consequences. She will have to be dealt with. Amora froze. The words burned inside her like a warning. She had expected betrayal, but not something like this. She stepped closer, trying to see what was on the table, when a sudden creak gave her away. All movement stopped. A moment later, she felt a hand grab her shoulder. She spun around to see Daniel's face, cold, surprised, but not angry. You shouldn't be here, he said quietly. You've gone too far. Amora swallowed hard. I need answers. His expression was unreadable. You don't know what you're asking for. Once you hear them, nothing will be the same. Her mother stepped forward, her face pale. Amora, you have to leave. Now. But Amora shook her head. No. I need to know why. Why would you betray me like this? The room fell silent. For the first time, Daniel looked away. Her mother's lips trembled. The man's eyes were hard, calculating. Finally, Daniel spoke. Because it's not just about us. There's something bigger here. Something you were never meant to see. But now, you have. The air thickened with tension. Amora could feel her world shifting beneath her. The truth was no longer a simple betrayal. It was a dangerous secret, one that could change everything she thought she knew. Her mother stepped closer. We tried to protect you. But it's too late now. Amora's voice was steady, even as her heart raced. Then tell me. I want the truth. And in that moment, Daniel looked at her with a strange mix of fear and sorrow, and began to speak. The story that followed would change her life forever. This story is more than just a tale of betrayal, it's a reminder that love, trust, and truth are fragile things. Sometimes the hardest battles are not fought with weapons, but with the courage to face what we fear most. Amora's journey shows us that even in the darkest moments, the heart will seek answers. If this story touched you, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the rest of our unforgettable tales. Drop a comment below telling us the country you're watching from and what your time says right now. We want to connect with you and hear your story too.